Hello, my name is Jessica. I will be your instructor today. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you guys are all having a great day. In this video, we are going to look over the Teen Times, the debate article from March 13th. The newspaper number is 571, and the headline for today's video is, Should the U.S. allow more drilling for oil? Alright, so let's get started by going over the introduction for the article. I have 5 points here. Let's start off by going over point number 1, the formation of oil. Oil comes from the remains of tiny plants and animals that died in ancient seas between 10 million and 600 million years ago. After the organisms died, they sank into the sand and mud at the bottom of the sea. Now, over the years, as the organisms decayed, intense heat and pressure distilled the organic material into crude oil and natural gas. Movements in the earth trap the oil and natural gas in the reservoir rocks between layers and impermeable rock, such as granite or marble. Okay, my second point, locating oil. Geologists, whether employed by an oil company or under contract from a private corporation, are the ones responsible for finding oil. Their job is to find the right conditions for an oil trap, the right source of rock, reservoir rock, and entrapment. Now, many years ago, geologists interpreted surface features, surface rock, and soil types, and perhaps some small core samples obtained by shallow drilling. However, today, oil geologists also examine surface rocks and terrain with the additional help of satellite images. Once they find a prospective oil field or strike, they mark the location using GPS coordinates on land or by marker buoys on water. Now, my third point, offshore oil drilling, which is the main topic of the article. Not all oil is accessible on land or in shallow waters. Oil deposits are sometimes buried deep under the ocean floor. Using sonic equipment, oil companies determine the drilling sites most likely to produce oil. They then use a mobile offshore drilling unit to dig the initial well. The unit's job is to drill down into the ocean's floor to find oil deposits. This oil is then refined into gasoline, kerosene, heating oil, and other products. Now let's look at my fourth point, controversy in the U.S. Offshore drilling is a highly controversial topic in many places around the world, including the United States. Opponents claim that offshore drilling ignores a more fundamental problem of unstable American energy consumption and will not contribute to lower gas prices or energy independence. They also believe that it is not worth the environmental risks. But as the cost of fuel continues to rise, more and more people are slowly beginning to realize, sometimes begrudgingly, that offshore drilling is necessary. In fact, President Barack Obama, once a firm opponent of offshore drilling, especially after the Deepwater Horizon disaster in 2010, which we will talk about in a couple of slides, opened new areas in U.S. coastal waters to offshore drilling for gas and oil. Now, my last point, what do you think about this topic? Should the U.S. allow more drilling for oil? Well, for this article, I am going to side with the cons and say that the costs of oil drilling are too high, and thus the U.S. should not allow more drilling for oil. Alright, so now for the next slide, let's go over the cons. First statement, I have 4 points. I have 5 points. Let's start with point number 1. The opponent's main argument is that oil drilling will have a minimal impact on oil prices. Since the 1990s, the U.S. government has consistently encouraged the development of its oil and gas resources, and the amount of drilling on federal lands has steadily increased during this time. However, gas prices has risen dramatically, contradicting the argument that more drilling means lower gas prices. There is simply no correlation between the two. Now, my second point, the world can reduce the price of oil by just reducing demand. If the world could be satisfied with the amount of oil that can be produced cheaply, then the price would fall. Now, my third point, the Energy Information Administration, which I will now refer to as the EIA, estimates that the U.S. could eventually produce another 1.3 million barrels of oil a day if all areas of the east and west coasts, the Gulf of Mexico, and Alaska's pristine Arctic National Wildlife Refuge were open for drilling. But on average, the world produces 73 million barrels of crude oil a day. An extra 1 or 2 million barrels will have little or no effect on the world's supply and demand. The bottom line is that America has only 1.6% of the world's oil supplies, but they use up 24%, so drilling isn't much of a solution at all. Now my fourth point, according to a 2008 study by the EIA, offshore drilling would not produce any results or measurable change in oil prices until 2030. The fact is that the US cannot simply drill its way to lower prices at the pump. And my last point, must find alternative solutions. Other options, from greater energy efficiencies to the development of other alternative fuels, are essential to reducing dependency on petroleum fuels and lowering fuel costs. All right, so let's move on to the second statement. In this section, we will look at the environmental consequences of offshore drilling. Let's start with the 2010 Deepwater Horizon spill. This was an oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico in which oil flowed unabated for about 3 months. It is the largest accidental marine oil spill in the history of the petroleum industry and the worst in U.S. history. 11 men were killed, another 17 were injured, and more than 4.9 million barrels of crude oil gushed into the Gulf. Now, the spill causes extensive damage to marine and wildlife habitats and to the Gulf's fishing and tourism industries. My second point, the state of Louisiana, which was heavily affected by the Deepwater Horizon spill, has had offshore drilling in place since 1947 and has received billions of dollars in profits as a result. However, the thousands of kilometers of canals and pipelines required to move the oil through coastal wetlands has caused erosion along Louisiana's coast. Natural coastlines and marshlands help to buffer the impact of large storms, and without them, areas are more vulnerable to storms and the damage that can result. Some environmentalists even say that this coastal erosion amplified Hurricane Katrina's damage back in 2005. Now my third point, pollution from daily operations. Transporting fuel from processing plants, the energy it takes to drill, and increased fuel and electricity consumption from related processes all contribute to many forms of environmental pollution. And my last point, in addition, when oil is brought up from beneath the ocean floor, other things also get brought up as well. Chemicals and toxic substances such as mercury and lead can be discharged back into the ocean. The water pumped up along with the oil may contain other harmful pollutants such as benzene and arsenic. Even the exploration that precedes drilling, which depends on seismic air guns, can harm sea mammals. Okay, so this is my final slide and the final statement of the cons. Let's go over the first point, U.S. consumption of oil. Oil from the Middle East, specifically the Persian Gulf region, accounts for 20% of U.S. oil imports, and this dependence is growing. By 2017, the U.S. will be importing approximately 68% of its oil needs. Now, oil consumption represents 40% of America's energy needs, primarily used in ground and air transportation. The dependence of the U.S. and the global economy on oil is growing, which can have dire consequences for the economic well-being of the United States and its national security. Now, my second point, the world, both developed and developing, is dependent on unstable or otherwise inhospitable regions for its oil supply. This social and political instability characterizes all of the major oil provinces in the Middle East, Venezuela, and Africa. Currently, the security and stability of the Middle East oil is threatened by ongoing conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, an aggressive and nuclear Iran, and radical Islamist movements with their terrorist aims. Now, my third point, looking into alternative energy solutions. How can we solve this problem? Well, encouraging investment and innovation in truly competitive alternative fuels and technologies, from sugarcane ethanol to plug-in hybrid cars, which will eventually compete with and possibly replace the current 19th century automotive technology, may be the best long-term answer for enhancing America's energy security in the 21st century. And my last point, must wean Americans' addiction to oil. President Barack Obama and the U.S. Congress need to develop a clear, ambitious vision for for weaning Americans off the addiction for oil. Dirty fuels are undermining the country's national security and contributing to future disasters. Offshore oil drilling is bad business. It won't make any significant difference in what people pay at the pump either, and it won't make Americans any less dependent on foreign oil. America's thirst for oil is bad for national security, its economy, and the environment. Now, what do you think about this controversial issue? Pick a side and come up with your own arguments. Have a conversation with your friends, family members, or classmates. What do you think? Thank you for joining me today. I hope you guys learned a lot from this presentation, and I will see you next time.